Welcome back to Experience. Class is back in session. Before we start the keynote session, I would like to remind you to use the Q&A feature to the right of your screen to submit your questions. I will be moderating a question and answer session with the provost following his presentation, and we welcome your questions. Thank you to all of you who have already submitted questions for us, and we look forward to an engaging discussion. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost Jeffrey Dirk. Provost Dirk is the university's Chief Academic Officer. In this role, he oversees and coordinates academic and research programs and works closely with the president in advancing the educational mission and core values of the University of Miami. He also oversees the university's 12 schools and colleges, select centers and institutes, as well as key offices and administrative units. Dr. Dirk is an accomplished engineer and scientist, as well as a respected academic with deep appreciation for the social sciences, the arts, and the humanities. Throughout his distinguished career, he has promoted many interdisciplinary research and educational initiatives, a leading expert in biomedical imaging, especially magnetic resonance imaging. He holds more than 40 patents and has been awarded numerous National Institutes of Health grants. In 2017, he was inducted as a fellow into the National Academy of Inventors, which recognizes academic achievement, innovation, and scientific discovery. Please help me welcome Provost Duerk.
Well, Maribel, thank you so much, and thank you for the University of Miami Alumni Association for inviting me to give today's keynote. Maribel, thank you for your leadership as president-elect and for serving as the moderator today. I think first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge Audrey Finkelstein's legacy in creating an endowment that ensures that we have a strong connection between our alumni and the university, and that connection exists in perpetuity. In my presentation today, I'll be talking about driving education into the future. I think that also builds on Audrey's visionary commitment to learning as an enduring and vibrant contract between alumni and their alma mater. So what I'd like to do now is share my thoughts on why higher education is not immune to the needs for innovation. And to start with, I think we would all agree that in a rapidly changing world, everyone must innovate. If we just use our last 18 months of experience, we've seen many of us go to working in an online format or remote setting, but restaurants have adapted, transportation systems have adapted. Everyone must innovate when the world is rapidly changing. And we in higher ed are not immune from that either. So if everyone must innovate, we too in higher ed are part of that obligation. And I just wanted to take a moment to think about the innovations that have occurred, not so much over my lifetime, but let's say my father's or my grandfather's. And when I look at, for example, transportation, computing, and education, in my grandfather's time, it was not uncommon for there to be a horse-drawn carriage. And yet today we have rockets that go into space. Computing, which really didn't exist in my grandfather's time, today is pervasive. It exists from our cell phones to our laptops to even the supercomputers that we have on our campus. And if I look across the different scales of change in over the course of, say, the last 50, 70 years, the pace of transportation for humans has gone up by 62,500 times. The pace of computing has gone up by 12 trillion times. And in education, maybe 20% faster than it was 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even 20 or 30 years ago. And therefore, one of the things we have to think about is, while all these other fields have been disrupted by technological change or other types of innovation, I think you can see by the figures on the bottom that we would all agree that perhaps higher education has not faced those same pressures And yet in reality, we know that they exist out there. So if I were to go back to, say, March 10th, 2020, 99% of the classes at the University of Miami would have been offered in the conventional face-to-face manner. And in the span of 10 days, we went from 100% being face-to-face to 100% of our classes being offered online due to the disruption of the pandemic. And I would argue that through that adaptation, we were able to advance the university in 10 days, what may have taken us 10 years to achieve otherwise. We saw an immediate need, we had immediate pressure, and I think one of the messages I want to get across is the fact that higher ed responded rapidly. We have a reputation in higher ed as being perceived as slow and sort of staid in our approach to things. But that adaptation in 10-day period of time gave rise to more innovation and a period of pressure than I think could have happened on any college campus over the next 10-year period. We can respond, and we demonstrated that to ourselves. And I think there's some important lessons to understand that we got from that 10-day period and now the subsequent year and a half that has existed since then. First of all, it's made us think about innovation in different ways. We didn't think so much about online learning as a pedagogical or teaching tool that should be considered for our routine day-to-day instruction. Not necessarily for every course, but for some courses, for some content, should we use it? I think prior to a year and a half ago, most faculty would have said, no, it's not for us. There are online universities, but that's not us. But over a period of 10 days, when every university goes online, there was an important thing that happened. We were able to train 1,500 faculty, virtually none of them who had any experience in online teaching, that they could do it. We had 17,000 students who learned or realized almost immediately that they could learn in that format. And so for perhaps the first time in the history of higher education, you had students and faculty learning at the same time. Faculty learning that this was a valid pedagogical methodology. 2, that they could teach in and successfully communicate and teach students in this format. And students were learning and realizing that other pedagogical approaches were available to them to learn material. And that has fundamentally changed the nature of the university. There's another change as well, not just being online, but being in a digital space that allowed us to think about what's the relationship between a faculty member and their student. If you think about when most of you, all of you were in college, the primary reference, the primary resource that you had available to you was your textbook. And textbooks still exist today. We have a bookstore just like we did on campus. Many books, however, are offered electronically. But it was still the faculty as the instructor, the sage on the stage, the textbook as the primary resource, and the relationship between a student and the faculty was transient. It was temporary, only for that 14-week period. But one of the things we asked faculty to do was use the digital technology that was put in front of them to record their lectures and make those lectures available to the student to supplement the textbooks that they already had available to. And that changes the nature of the faculty-student relationship. It changes it from a transient one, the moment you're in front of the class, to one that passes by and is gone forever, to an enduring relationship where the student has the opportunity to over and over see the expertise of the faculty member, hear how they explain something, and just like the textbook is available to them as an enduring resource, so too now is the nature of the faculty member in the class. And so today, a year and a half later, if you were to look at the mix of our classes that we're offering this semester, we would have about 15-20% of the classes that we would call sort of experiential. These would be labs and studios that have always been around, but they certainly have a different feel to them now because of the opportunity to supplement them with online material. We have another 15, 20% of our classes that are offered exclusively online, not because of the pandemic, but because it is a valid pedagogical approach for students to gain that information, for us to achieve efficiency, but also for us to use all of the bandwidth available to us in that approach. And the last thing I would say that changed is we learned that as a research intensive university, we could be and support excellence in teaching and excellence in research as part of our mission. And we did that through the creation of the training programs that got our faculty up to speed with online, but that we've had continuing since then in a program we called Petal, which is our platform for excellence in teaching and learning. It's a series of programs, courses, activities that support faculty excellence in teaching, and I think more importantly, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, and student learning. Teaching is the act that we do, but the outcome that we want is student learning. The other thing we came to realize, I think this was also sort of in the back of our heads, but it's more in the front of our heads now, is the fact that in the future, the fundamentals of the college experience are going to be consistent. That is, it's not just the information that we can pound into a student's head in the course of them coming into our classes in the 14-week semesters, but there's other things about the value of a residential university that are important to a person's development. The fact that you leave your normal community that you grew up in and come into a completely different environment with different kinds of people who you didn't know before, to grow emotionally, to gain independence, to do all of those things, to become independent of your parents, financially responsible, to understand that there are consequences and decisions that you have to make yourself. That will not change in the future. And I think it's one of the things that we recognize, that the competition for a place like University of Miami or a Harvard or a Yale or an Ohio State or a Michigan, that part of the value that the university offers is that personal growth in addition to the intellectual growth. And I think of that in some ways as like what people do with a bottle of wine where they cellar it. They let it sit and age and mature. The ingredients are somewhat the same. There's nothing that changes in that bottle. But that aging process, that maturation process, that is an important part about this critical 4 years. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. Now, the other thing I want to think about is the fact that the other thing that's changed in an important way for many of you over the time that you were at University of Miami is the composition of our students. If we went back, say, for example, to 1975, about 45% of our students would have been from Florida. Right now, today, it's about 34% if you look across the entire university and our undergraduate population. But if you look at our students who just arrived in August of this year, only about 25% of that freshman class is from Florida. The rest of the students, as you can see here, have gone up from about 4% international in 75 to 7% today. In the first year class, it's actually closer to 10%. And you can just see that the composition of the students is very different today. And I'm very much affected by a 2019 Bureau of Labor Statistics report. They asked 500 companies in the United States, as students leave university, what would you like to see as advice to those universities in terms of what their graduates should possess? And the thing that's interesting is in the top 10 list, none of those things in the top 10 said anything about additional competency in their major, additional skills in their major. It was things like leadership, cultural competency, ability to engage in and have discourse on a complicated topic, ethical reasoning. And that's one of the things that we have put a great deal of effort into over the last 2 years in terms of Arcane Commitment. This is a process where students who will be coming to the university get, in a very intentional way, these additional skills in cultural competency, ethical reasoning, respectful dialogue, to ensure that they have practical knowledge and soft skills in addition to the hard content we provide them in their majors and minors in the classroom. This is that cellaring process I was talking about. And those universities who can supplement their classroom with intentional development of the whole student, not just the student major, I think is a very important step. So as I said before, I think that a lot of the fundamentals of the college experience are going to remain the same. The other thing is, if you think about the difference between the way typical undergraduate students were taught previously and the way, for example, a medical student is taught, are very, very different. And I know that because I used to be a full professor in a school of medicine before coming to the University of Miami. In medical training, there's the concept of see one, do one, teach one. And it's the adage that basically you have to see how it's done, be able to do it yourself, and to be able to have enough experience and facility with that knowledge to be able to teach somebody else with it. And so when we look at the way we're looking at our curriculum in the future, that experiential opportunity to actually participate in actually doing, not just hearing, but learning and doing, and demonstrating a level of mastery is an important part of the curriculum of the future. And that's something we're actually working on quite a bit. And the other thing is something I mentioned as well, and that is from the faculty perspective, and that's excellence in teaching and learning. Teaching is what we do. We provide the educational opportunity for our students by what we do in the classroom. But the outcome that we're interested in really is not the activity that we do, but the outcome on the student side. So much more about what you'll see in the future in terms of curriculum will be assessments based on, has the student actually learned the material? And have I been an effective teacher by assessing whether the students have actually learned the content? And so our belief is that at a university like the University of Miami, that's a research-intensive university, you can have faculty be great researchers and also great teachers. And it's one of the reasons why we developed this program called Petal, which supports our faculty who are at a research-intensive university to develop and push the envelope of their disciplines in their research and scholarship, take that knowledge into the classroom so that our students are learning on the front edge of the wave of a field as opposed to the back edge of a wave in terms of materials that come out much later. Now, one of the other things I believe very deeply is that learning is like oxygen. Unless you have it, you will stagnate and fail. Much like you need food and oxygen to survive, in the future, you are going to need education in order to advance and simply to stay capable and competent in your field. And we as a university have previously taken a very episodic approach to education. And this isn't just for our alumni, but recognizing there are many people out there who could gain from and benefit from our knowledge and ability to teach, and for the learner to actually grow in their personal development. And so this idea of continuous learning is something that I think you will see many universities, including the University of Miami, approaching, rather than an episodic approach of 18 to 22-year-olds, 22 to 24 if you're getting a master, maybe to 28 if you get a PhD or an MD. But thinking about the individuals in terms of being their partner throughout their entire lifetime, so that I too am a stakeholder in their personal and professional growth. Now, one of the things I always talk about is, this is my cell phone, and I have had the same cell service provider for the last 20 years. It's T-Mobile, if anyone cares. And T-Mobile is my cell phone service provider now and in the future. And I think I can be the educational service provider for the community, for the alumni out there, for the rest of their life. There's no reason that I shouldn't accept that opportunity to brand myself as your educational service partner throughout your entire professional career. And that's something we're very much working on as well. But if we're going to do that, that is create a different kind of learner, to create a different kind of relationship, we have to move beyond our existing structure of the university. All of you are familiar with sort of the approach of the university, have varying, at the University of Miami, 11 different schools and colleges, and each of those schools and colleges producing degrees and graduates. I think in the future, what you'll see, and we're certainly doing this at the University of Miami, is taking a little bit different approach. Certainly schools are very, very important in terms of providing degrees, but there are other structures, institutes, centers that have specific foci whose, in the output of those schools, colleges, centers, and institutes, continue to advance knowledge and create graduates who are leaders, who are problem solvers, and have a degree, as opposed to graduates with a degree who are alumni. And I think taking that approach of what do we want to create, what we want to create is problem solvers and leaders who are graduates of the University of Miami is a little bit different perspective, because it requires the university to have different kind of organizational structures. And let me just give you one statistic that I think is interesting about that. For our freshman class that came when I came in August of 2017, 40% of the jobs that they moved into didn't exist when they started. So if I'm only creating degrees, and it takes as long as it does to sort of create the curriculum and put those in place, I'm behind the curve, because 40% of the jobs that are out there didn't even exist when the students entered the university. We need structures that support different kinds of learners and different kind of degree structures. The other thing is, and I'll share with you that, not only our degree programs, but also our structures like our Resilience Academy, you'll be hearing more about over the next few days and weeks, being really, really important to the future of the university. The Resilience Academy has a focus on graduate education and developing interdisciplinary courses to look at multiple dimensions, for example, of planetary resilience. It's not just climate change, it's not just coastal resilience, but as the planet, as we try to seek outcomes related to planetary resilience, we have to accept the fact that there will be changes in the business community, changes in the insurance industry, changes in society, what areas we move to, how we develop properties. All of these things are related, and having structures like a Planetary Resilience Academy allows the best and brightest of our faculty in an interdisciplinary way contribute to solutions, much like the National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Medicine, National Academy of Science, help contribute to broad-based solutions across the country. And it's important for us to come up with completely new kinds of relationships, whether it be with venture capital groups or startups or different major corporations out there. We as a university need to understand that Miami is in a tech ecosystem that drives our education, that seeks our students as employees, but also seeks the expertise of our faculty and the assets of our university. And those kind of new partnerships are going to be incredibly important for us. And so how do we take all of this to the next level? In some ways, it's just a commitment on our part to push forward and to commit to change. And I have the great advantage as being a basic scientist. As you heard, I ran experiments all the time. And sometimes they don't work, but you have to fail fast and try something out. And when it works, commit to doing those, building those at scale. And the other thing is we need to recognize that as part of our university strategic plan, the priorities are to help solicit the resources and the technologies and relationships that move the needle, resources for our students, resources for our faculty, and resources for an unparalleled college experience. You'll hear more as alumni about the campaign for the University of Miami, Ever Brighter. And I'm happy to be here and thrilled to be here, not only as your provost, but also be the person at the university with the responsibility for driving the institution forward and making sure that we're on the front edge of the wave going forward. So Maribel, thank you very much for giving the opportunity to share some thoughts with the alumni, and I look forward to the Q&A period as well.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Dirk. And before we dive in, I'd like to start with what I'm sure is a burning question for some of our audience today, which is, what exactly is the job of a provost?
You know, that is the most common question I get asked is, what is a provost? It's essentially the chief academic officer, but more importantly, I'm a faculty member. And as a faculty leader at the institution that has responsibility for all of the schools and colleges and all the research programs at the university, you know, part of my job is to work with the deans and the schools and colleges to help them implement those cutting edge academic programs, the cutting edge research program that keeps us on the front edge, but also to challenge them to work together across schools and colleges, to provide them resources to do that, and to make sure that, you know, there has to be somebody at the university that's keeping an eye on our programs and making sure that we're not sort of growing stagnant. That's what my job is, and I do that by working with the deans and the schools and colleges.
I think it's safe to say you touch just about every aspect of the university at some point or another.
Pretty much, yeah.
Earlier, you noted that the pace of innovation in education hasn't exactly been revolutionary. So I'd like to spend a moment on something that actually feels like a remarkably speedy evolution, and that is the transformation of the University of Miami into a research institution. Can you put in context for us what it means to be a research university? But as far as we've come in little more than 40 years as one, that seems remarkable.
Yeah, so if you think back to the founding of the university in 1925, 1926, the idea from the beginning was for a significant, vibrant university to exist in Miami in perpetuity. But for the university's first, 45 years till the early 1980s, the University of Miami was a teaching university. And I think the challenge is if you're only teaching, if your role is teaching alone, then you're teaching what somebody else discovered. You're providing your students sort of that opportunity perhaps years after the textbook was created and the research disseminated. There's not much of a value proposition for a private teaching university, a small private teaching university in South Florida to exist. And so I give tremendous credit to Tad Foote, who in the early 80s said, we have got to become a research intensive university. And in the span of, the next 40 years, we went from having very, very modest research programs to being what we call an R1 university, which is the highest level of research activity in the United States. And I think there's 300 or so universities that meet that qualification. And to do that in 40 years, and to do it as comprehensively as this university has, medicine, engineering, arts and sciences, architecture, music, nursing, communication, that is an amazing achievement. It's meteoric in some ways. And what we have to do now is, in many ways, make those programs more mature, have sustainable depth to them, but also to make sure that they continue to grow and adapt as well. It's a remarkable achievement. I don't think most people appreciate the fundamental shift that happened in the early 80s under Tad Foote's leadership. And also how far this university has come in 41 years.
It's an incredible source of pride, I think, for all of us. And, President Foote was my president while I was a student here on campus. Though, to be clear, I wasn't here as early as the early 80s.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, and I appreciate that point. one of the great things the University of Miami has had are presidents who are here for a long time. I think Julio Frank, our president now, is only the 6th president in the history of the University of Miami.
That's right. That's right. I'd like to turn now to some of the questions we've received from our audience today. As you can imagine, several have fallen into the pandemic-related theme. You spoke about this some during your presentation. With the pandemic continuing to disrupt so many aspects of daily life, including education, of course, what do you see as a longer-term impacts to higher education and how students learn?
So I touched on this just very briefly. I think one of the great things to come out of the pandemic is the forced exploration that we had to do as faculty to get out of sort of the conventional classroom. And faculty learn very quickly that they can teach in perhaps the most diametrically opposed way that they could ever have imagined previously. To have gone from face to face, in March of 2020 to online. There are so many options in between those two, but for them to learn that, wow, I just went from this to this, and my students are learning and I'm teaching, that gave them ability to explore everything in between those 2 points. And faculty have begun doing that. As I said before, we have about 18% of our classes right now are in some kind of flipped or other kind of configuration we would have seen before. So it was freedom to explore, and that's really a great thing. The other thing is our thought of what the classroom has changed 100% as well. We used to, think about every year that we would refresh some of our classrooms, and those classrooms don't look that different from what I showed on the second or third slide. But right now, we're looking at completely different configurations for the classroom. And yesterday, in fact, we opened up or had the dedication ceremonies of a highly reconfigurable classroom with whiteboards and screens on the walls, desks that could be pushed around and moved around for team-based type of projects, for our activities. The fact that if you want to do experiential learning, you have to actually experience, you actually have to do it. And so just even the concept of what is an academic space changes. We used to say, well, what's a classroom? But we don't even necessarily use that terminology anymore, because the learning and the methodology you want to use to pursue the student learning, those spaces have to be sort of uniquely customized or uniquely designed. So we have a group on campus now their sort of name is Classrooms of the Future. So the spaces will be very, very different than what they are now. More experiential, more highly reconfigurable, more to support these additional elements beyond just the content, but sort of mastery of the topic as well.
I can tell you that as a parent, the amazingly fast transition from in-person to online to layering in, as you're talking about, the opportunities for experiential have just been both stunning and appreciated.
Well, and to your point, Maribel, I'll share just one anecdote with the alumni group on the Zoom. I think I checked my notebook the other day, and I think it was January 12th, where we had our first leadership conversation about the pandemic. And I think it was on January 25th where our head of IT said, if this pandemic comes to be, we're going to need additional bandwidth. We're going to need additional tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and other things. And in 3 days, we had bought a site license for all of University of Miami for Zoom. It's probably the fastest purchase we've ever made. And 3 months later, our campus was using those tools that we had acquired 2 months before. So we had already developed the training programs if we needed them. And I could not be more proud of the faculty and staff and students for how resilient they were through that period. And now afterwards, we're not through it yet, obviously, but the sense of opportunity to explore and to try, doesn't have to succeed, but to try new things, I think is really, really important for us.
That's right. This is a good segue too into another question we've received, which is really about, I mean, obviously the pandemic has had dramatic effects on our ability to be in person in many settings. And so we've learned that we can be remote, whether that's the workplace, the classroom, et cetera. And so the discussion or the question centers on what then is the value of in person? Um, no doubt there are pros and cons to this, but from your perspective, what is the value proposition for the residential college experience?
So I think that's a great question. And so I'll go to the students that I've talked to as an example. And these are conversations that have happened both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And that is, if you look at, say, the student population, at the University of Miami, I think we have 30% or so Latin students, about 11% Black students. Most of the rest are either international or white students. If a student's sitting in their parents' basement or in their bedroom at home, the challenge is you're not getting any of those interactions. You're not learning that people are basically good everywhere. No matter where they're from, you're not meeting kids from California and Ohio and Saudi Arabia. And so there is these additional dimensions that you aren't going to get if you're sitting at home. And that's part of the cellaring thing I was talking about before. That's a very, very important part of this very special 4 years. And in addition to that, if you think of, the ability to engage with, the content of a class, to have that conversation with a faculty member, to actually do that experiment, there is something about holding in your hands. I'm an electrical engineer by training, and I learned so much more when I went from learning about circuits to actually burning my fingers with soldering irons, about the difference between knowing something and being able to do something that was just so fundamentally important. And I think those are the kind of opportunities that do speak to the value proposition of a place like the University of Miami, the kind of students we have, the kind of resources we have that do specifically for many types of students are going to be irreplaceable.
So given that, do you foresee the university or do you have any plans to expand the list of fully online degree programs?
Yeah, we do, because part of it, as I said before, is I also recognize that there's more than the traditional kind of learner out there. So for example, we just announced a recent relationship with 2U. 2U is a company that offers online educational programs. We have an existing MBA program in our Miami Herbert Business School. The on-site MBA, has a few hundred kids in it every year. But there's also a set of learners out there who aren't going to come to a residential campus, and they want the University of Miami Herbert Business School MBA. So by us offering it in an online way in a partnership with 2U, we can serve a different kind of learner. And if you look at the demographics of our on-site and online MBA, they're completely different. Typical on-site MBA students, 25, 27, 28 years old. Online MBA student, 35, 36, 37, 38 years old, has a family, maybe young kids. They're doing it for career progression. They maybe need a little bit more time to do it, so they can't take a full academic load. And so if we're going to accept our opportunity and the responsibility that comes with that, to think about continuous learning, education like oxygen, you're going to need it to survive, then we need to be thinking about how are we going to reach and create programs, don't have to be degree programs even, but just opportunities to to provide learners with new information, new skills, in some cases in very bite-sized chunk. It doesn't have to be a degree program. It could just be a course or a badge, a certificate. But that's where I think, again, some evolution here has to happen and is happening at UM.
This is a very related question that's come in. We have obviously majority of our audience today are alumni, and I think there's interest in what new benefits are being developed for alumni who graduated many years ago, perhaps, and likely before a lot of the e-learning opportunities. What resources exist, and will some of those be free to alumni?
So that's a great question. Thanks for asking. We've actually developed 3 or 4 MOOCs that we've offered to alumni. One was in cybersecurity, one was in program management. I forget what the other 2 were in. They were developed a couple years ago. Those were offered through the Alumni Association. And I think one of the ideas we're talking about is there a low-cost subscription model, for example, that would allow alumni sort of continuous access to the library, either the library of courses or subscribe to and provide input to future courses and topics they would want to see covered. I think a really interesting one that would be, sort of potentially right over the horizon is what's a pandemic? How's it work? Just some information on that. But there's numerous other topics. In the past, we used to think about things like an MBA. You're going to go at some point and get your MBA. Then at some other point in your career, many years later, executive education. And then after you retire, continuing education. But, the opportunities are really continuous, and we need to respond by not just creating degree programs, but completely different kind of things. And we're going to need the input of people like the alumni to tell us what kind of things you're interested in. We'll start working on developing those. I very much look forward to ideas from this community in terms of what would be some models that would work, but also what are some topics you'd like to hear our faculty experts, developing some projects on, some courses on to offer you.
I love that, and certainly want to underscore that and encourage our fellow alumni to please submit their ideas for the kind of learning opportunities they'd like to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, appropriately enough, some of the questions we've received, of course, center on education. What, in your perspective, is some of the most exciting thing happening in education today? And conversely, what are some of our greatest challenges?
So I think interdisciplinarity is a really interesting one in that, as I said, my background's engineering. I was very fortunate to get into a field that we all know now as magnetic resonance imaging. I started out as a physics and math major. And while I was a physics and math major, I took chemistry, I took organic chemistry, I took anatomy and physiology. Don't ask me why. For some reason, I just did that. And when this technology called nuclear magnetic resonance imaging came out, I was ideally suited to get in that field and contribute to its development over the 20, 30-year period, because I had this very interdisciplinary perspective. And if you talk to students today, one of the things you'll see, particularly at UM, is you may have a student that has a degree in accounting, but they have a minor in Spanish and another major in psychology. So the students today are already thinking about what are they interested in and how can they stitch those things together. And I think at UM, we do a particularly good job about giving students the opportunity to make their educational experience uniquely their own. That's really interesting and a really fun thing to do. And then I think the other one is this idea of sort of the Keynes commitment. That is to make sure that in an intentional way, we're providing opportunities for not just disciplinary growth, but interdisciplinary growth. We've talked about it here at the U as, if you think of a normal university education, you have sort of academic breadth, your general electives, and then disciplinary depth, such that sort of creates a T. But if you have this additional component on the bottom, intercultural competencies, ethical reasoning, numeracy, in addition to literacy, now you have an I-shaped student, a more stable, more complete, and I think that's something that I'm very excited about as well.
I love that. I know we're getting close to wrapping up, but I want to take us back to a point you made when we were talking about the value of the residential college experience. And that is really centered in diversity and the value of diversity. And obviously, I know the university has a deep commitment to diversity and inclusion and has done a lot to really foster that as part of our culture here. I'm interested to hear more from you about some of those efforts, particularly to attract diverse faculty, and why it's so important.
Yeah, I think and I'm glad I showed, and thanks for the question, and I'm also glad I showed the slide that I did earlier. If you go back to the student population here in the 50s or in the 70s, it was predominantly a white student population and then the population from the Miami area. But today's student is very different. We have, a much greater distribution of students by race, by ethnicity, by geographic location. And it's really important for students to see role models, to see that they can get to the next level. And there are people who preceded them who got to that sort of level of success and academic achievement. And so it's important for us to try to develop and influence the pipeline of role models and future scholars in the fields. And so one of the things we've done is in faculty affairs, for example, we have an office that specifically helps search committees in their formation to understand what implicit bias is, how to overcome it, how to ensure diversity and excellence in the finalist pool of our faculty. And some of these activities, if I just use last year as an example, on a normal year, we would recruit 2 or 3 Black faculty into the tenure track. Last year, I think these efforts gave rise to recruiting 13, 14. And when you have 10% of your undergraduate students being Black students, you have another 30% who are Latin students. Seeing scholars who look like them is incredibly important. And we need to compete, and we have been doing it very successfully, in the marketplace of excellent scholars who have those additional attributes because they mirror, if you will, what our student population looks like. It's a measure of way to ensure retention of our students because they begin to feel like, yeah, UM is a place where they too can be successful because they're seeing success at that next level that looks like them. And so a lot of these initiatives that we've done and throughout the university have very significant impact, not just on the culture of the university, but also sort of the student experience and retention and other things.
Thank you for that commitment and for all the great progress that we're seeing as well on this front. Provost Duerk, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure to be with you on the UM experience, and I look forward to seeing you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The future. The Brighter Education campaign theme outlines how the university will transform the education experience by integrating learning, a sense of well-being, and a culture of belonging as imperatives in the ongoing pursuit of knowledge, championing lifelong learning and partnering with our students, alumni, and community members throughout their educational journeys. Before showing the video, I would like to remind you that it will be followed by a brief break. I invite you to take a moment during that time to visit the Attendee Hub, where you can view upcoming events, volunteer opportunities, and information on our open online courses, or MOOCs, as Provost Duerk just referenced. Then please rejoin us for the afternoon session coming up promptly at 1 p.m. And now, Please enjoy this video preview of our campaign theme, Brighter Education for a Changing World.
There is so much I love about the University of Miami. When you bring these students together from all over the world, that absorbs into the students and the students then give it back. There's some magic that takes place when these students get down here. I've been in a variety of roles at the university. To me, there's nothing more meaningful than participating in the growth of an individual. Higher education has been evolving. There should be an active commerce between the experience outside of the classroom and what students are learning through their books and their lectures.
I'm Miles Pendleton. I'm a senior at the University of Miami, majoring in Africana Studies, Political Science, Sociology, and Criminology. I'm originally from Eugene, Oregon. I'm the son of a biracial marriage. My mom is a German immigrant, and my dad is originally from Newark, New Jersey. With that diversity of experience, that diversity of race, that diversity of culture, the university saw me and they recognized a version of myself that I couldn't even see at that moment. I was a name on a page from 3,000 miles away who had never been in Florida. They recognized someone who had what they were looking for here at this university.
There's an incredible maturation process that occurs when students attend a university. By encountering problems and trying to fix those problems, by engaging in projects for real-world clients, not just for classrooms, we will enable people, when they graduate, to really make a difference in the world.
I want to go into public service. So what skills do I need to improve upon? What love do I need to find in those areas? And that also pervades into the things that you participate in on and off campus. It's finding a way to take that passion and then turning it into a developing experience. What I love about the university is it's presenting me this unique opportunity that enables me to explore and really investigate a lot of my interests with a really unfettered access.
When I think of brighter education, I think in part about this getting students out of fixed classroom spaces and out into sunshine, out into the sunshine of the real world and experiences.
The component of creating new visions and new understandings and new perspectives is this idea of illumination, brighter, brightness, light. And to me, I think that that light stems through the experiences you have, because it's those moments that illuminate what's possible.